Hey guys, welcome to my cozy productive writing vlog. I'm really glad you're here. So this is part 2 of beta reader feedback. In part 1 last week, I examined the feedback from beta readers who had not read the story before. My beta readers fall into two camps: the ones who read a very early first draft and it was very badly written, and God bless them for reading it, and the ones who hadn't read any of the drafts before and they were coming at the story with fresh eyes. So, in recap, my novel Dark Witch Rising is a dual point of view modern magic story about witches. It takes place in the rural countryside where there's not a lot of people around, there's family feud, there's small town politics, everything you're going to find in a small isolated community. So, on the good side of things, before we get into any questions or criticisms the beta readers had, is everyone seems to enjoy the pacing. Like I said, it is dual point of view, so you're going back and forth between chapters that happen on Reese Hill and chapters that happen on Blackwater Road, and everybody has kind of quintessentially come back and said the pacing's really good, that no part was dull. They had a lot of fun reading it, and one beta reader told me that it kind of had the point of they got really involved in one of the character's stories. So when that chapter ended and they had to go to the other character, they were trying to rush through that character so they could get back to the character they were really excited about. But then they were like, oh, this is really interesting. And then the same effect happened with that character. So that's really good. That made me really happy to know that pacing was on point and everything was really working. So the beta readers who had read the first draft of this story seemed to be universally confused by a few of the characters, because it makes sense. The characters changed from the old version to the new version, and the three characters they seem to be pinpointing the most are Sam, Jack, and Kat. Now, Sam and Jack are twins. They live on the hill. They moved into an old house, so our main character, Kate, has never met them before, and Kat is Kate's grandmother. They share the same name. They're both named Catherine, why their names are so similar. Now, the problem with these characters that at least one of the beta readers had was just ambivalence towards them. They're built up enough in the story, but I, as the author, haven't really given them enough to care about the characters, especially the twins, especially Sam and Jack. Sam and Jack are a very integral part of Act 3, especially in the end action, that peak action moment in Act 3. But this particular beta reader just couldn't find anything about them to root for, to care about, because part of the problem is that they were introduced so late in the story. I don't think Jack shows up until Act 2, and Sam doesn't show up until Act 3. Now, if you remember, or if you watched the Part 1 version of this video series, that they used to have a lot more in the earlier chapters of the book, but, plot lines twisted and changed, and things had to get cut, and part of the things that were cut were their earlier parts. I don't think I can add those earlier parts back in because they don't really make any sense anymore. So it's going to take, this is probably the part that's going to take the most rework, is re-examining these characters because they can't be cut, and I have to find a way to interject more of who they are and give the reader more reasons to care about them. So when things happen to them or things are happening to them, then the reader cares about it. And if I haven't done that, then I haven't done my job as a writer. Since the characters themselves don't physically show up until later in the story, I'm going to have to use word of mouth from other characters to give you more of a backstory about who the twins are. And in Sam's case specifically, I need to show that she is a lost soul who's been wandering her whole life and doesn't really know who she is or what she wants to do with herself. And then at the end, she finally figures out that this is what she can do, this is how she can help, and that makes that decision more impactful to the reader. Now, I can understand the beta readers being confused about Kat. Again, Kat was in a similar situation where there was much more backstory about her in earlier revisions of the story, and they were cut for sake of clarity because I felt like it was bogging down the actual story that was happening here. The problem is that Kat is Kate's main motivation to return to the house, thus setting the story in motion. I'm not quite sure what to do at this point. I guess probably the best way to handle this would be to introduce more points about why Kate is afraid of her grandmother, why her grandmother's actions influenced her life as much as it did, and maybe that will help the readers understand why Kate's doing what she's doing, why she's come back to the hill, and why her grandmother was such a big influence on all the decisions she's currently making while she's on the hill. So again, one of the many valid points that these beta readers have come back with, but I do need to go back through and add some of that exposition back into it. Now, it's not going to be paragraphs and paragraphs, but maybe like a couple lines of dialogue or a couple lines of explanation would go a long way with helping the reader understand the decisions the characters are making. I thought this was great. There are many points like this brought up that kind of like I think one of the beta readers calls it at one point screaming at the TV moment, like, why are the characters making this really stupid decision? And this is why beta readers exist, because this story is just all up in my head, and sometimes decisions that characters are making I dismiss, or they've already made them in my head and I just didn't write them down. I know that sounds terrible, but this is why I need other people reading the story to point out obvious points that are not obvious to me, because like I said, the story is all in my head. So there are various points about in this very similar vein throughout the whole story about things that are inconsistent or things that just don't make sense or are even repeated. And this is something that I don't really have any excuse for. I should have caught these. But again, the story went through so many revisions, and in some cases I was copy and pasting from old work. And I did that multiple times. Like I copy and pasted for like say revision 2, and then I copy and pasted for revision 3. But those two copy and paste, I didn't catch that they were actually copy and pasting the same passage. So good job, Deb, for not noticing that you wrote the same passage twice and didn't delete it out of one of the areas. Now, actually, in my defense, there were several more points of those in the story that I caught and I deleted, but clearly not all of them. So, gotta do another read through and try to catch all those and correct them to one way of thinking, or deleting the repeated bits at least. There are many points of the readers being confused about character motivation that I knew in my head as I was writing it what needed to happen to further the plot. And then there's things that are in there because of the characters' motivations. Like, for example, one of my wonderful beta readers pointed out in the very beginning, Kate's purpose for returning to the hill is to find her grandmother's journals. That is the premise for that. The premise for the plot. That is the promise that is set up in the early like first page, saying that she's there to find the journals because she wants to know why her grandmother hated her so much. So, when she finds a locked cabinet that might possibly have the journal, at least a journal in it, why does she abandon it so quickly in favor of searching the rest of the house? And that's a very good point, and one that I know the answer to in my head, but I did not explain it on the page to the reader. And there are lots of like little bits of these peppered through the story where I know the motivation for it. I know why they needed to move to the next one, but I just did not do a proper job of explaining it to the reader about why the characters made that decision to turn in another direction or to do something else instead of the obvious thing. And some of these are just dumb. I mean, some of these are a very obvious, like at one point, Patty offers Chris and Kate a ride up to Chris's house because a storm is coming, it's going to rain, it's nighttime, and they refuse, choosing to walk instead. Now they need to refuse because the plot dictates they have to, because something's going to happen while they're walking. But at the same time, the beta reader was like, what? That was such an obvious choice. Who in their right mind wouldn't take a ride when it's dark and about to storm? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And that's it. That's true. That 100% does not make sense. And I didn't even think about that while I was writing because I knew what had to happen for the plot. And now I've got to figure out some way to make it plausible about why they refused that ride in that specific instance. I like some of these comments that Tad is just an idiot sometimes. Like, I have Tad as like this, he's a country cop, he's a bit of a Boy Scout, and he always wants to make sure everyone's okay. And I guess he has a habit, or I have a habit of writing him asking if someone's okay. And one of the beta readers at one point is like, no, he's not okay. He's dying. Half his leg is ripped off. Why are you asking him if he's okay? It's funny because I didn't even realize I'm writing these and how dumb it would sound to someone else reading the story. Now, the whole Chris and Kate situation is 100% very real, very valid. If you follow the channel, you'll know that at literally last minute in editing the story, I changed Chris's whole arc in the third act. I changed his motivation, I changed what he did, and I rewrote it in like 48 hours, which was really rushed, and there's a lot of typos and really dumb shit, but it is something that I was concerned about, and I knew I would have to change later, that the Chris and Kate struggle wasn't hitting home. And some of these comments just really make that evident to me, that I didn't do a good job of pointing out why they're upset with each other, and there's that whole bits of the backstory seem to be missing because I wrote it at the last minute, and it's not coming together well enough for the reader to care and wonder why things feel like they're coming out of left field. Okay, so clearly I have a lot of work ahead of me. I thought I was going to join in this month's NaNoWriMo and start a new draft of a new story, but I've got a lot of work to do now before I send this off to my editor at the end of December. So next week I'm going to get started on that, and we'll talk about how I'm addressing these changes actually in the story and making changes to hopefully make them better for future readers. So thanks for watching. If you got this far, you're amazing. I love you, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a great one.